Thank you, and welcome to our webinar, New Survey Regs Part 2, New F-Tags, Deficiencies, Scope, and Severity. This will be a 90-minute webinar, including a question-answer period during the last 15 minutes of the presentation. You may submit a question to our speaker by locating the Q&A box in the lower right-hand corner of your screen. Click in the blank text field at the bottom of your screen to type in your question, then hit Ask or Enter on your keyboard. The questions will be answered in the order they are received. You will be emailed an online evaluation form immediately after today's event. Now I would like to introduce our presenter. Barbara Thompson is a certified dietary manager, resident assessment coordinator with over 20 years of experience in healthcare, having worked in facilities, government, current adjunct instructor, and held many national board positions. She has conducted numerous long-term care educational sessions across the country and currently is an independent healthcare consultant, educator, working with ANFP as their education and regulatory outreach consultant. Thank you. At this time, I'd like to turn the webinar over to your presenter, Barbara Thompson.
Greetings, everyone, and thanks for joining us this afternoon. We're going to have about an hour and a half of all there is to know about the new regs, or hopefully as much as we can get squeezed in. And so once again, if you've got questions, you've been directed how to put those in there. But let's go ahead and let's talk about the new F-Tag deficiency scope and severity for November 2017. So what? So now what? When we're talking about what we're going to learn today, we want to make sure that you're going to understand the new numbering and the crosswalk that we've provided from the old to the new F-tags. We're going to take a look at what scope and severity is and understand what the penalty grid is and how you guys are graded on your surveys. And then we're going to discuss some implications as best that we know at this moment. I like to tell people, when it comes to CMS, the Centers for Medicaid and Medicare Services, I only know today what I know today because what I know from yesterday is what I learned. And I don't know what tomorrow brings, but I will know more than I know today. So my little mantra is live for today, learn from yesterday, and have great anticipation for tomorrow. So with that said, let's go ahead and dive in to see what CMS has now handed out. So we started a year ago with what we call the new LTC long-term care regulations that started November of 2016. And it's going to thread through a 3-year phase all the way to 2019. And so as of Tuesday, November 28th at midnight, we went into phase 2 of these regulations. So for dietary, we're going to look today at what the new F-tags are in the surveyor guidance. And it kind of involves all those things you see floating at the bottom: competencies, the CDM scope of practice, what our skills are, how ethics is involved, and our job descriptions, so that we can kind of see how that all threads through all of the phases of the new regs and ties into our CDM scope of practice. I want to also introduce, we did a revamping this week at ANFP of our website for regulations. So we kind of want you to feel comfortable visiting this website. We've done a good job, I feel, of breaking it down into phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3. I'm a less is more type of gal, so we've kind of got it. If you click on phase 1, that box there, it will show you what's in phase 1, phase 2, and et cetera. So one click should get you in there. We're going to keep this updated and keep it current. We're going to try to post any questions that I come across or we come across that we feel we need to share with you to give some clarity. That will be on this site. And once again, that is on the anfponline.org. And you have the link up above. And like I said, we're showing you the phases as they come. So be prepared. There's more to come in phase 2. And, well, there's more to come in phase 3. Phase 2, we're living it right now. So phase 2 is our current. So when and what's on your radar for healthcare? Right now, phase 2, the F-tags, something we call the interpretive guidance, That is what the surveyors, that is their guidance, their how-to book on surveying you. And then at the same time, they started a new survey process that started after midnight of Tuesday. And with that, we have new F tags. Some were added, some were combined. So we'll talk about that. They've updated the IG, so the interpretive guidance. Like I said, they have a new set of blueprints to use when they come in and survey us. So let's take a look at the F tags first and foremost. So we have federal F tags. We have our state guidance, and then we have our federal guidance. And when we do a survey, the survey team comes in and they do it based off of the federal guidance, and they also have their state guidance. A survey, an annual survey, comes to your building between 12 and 15 months. 15 months is the max. So they want the surveyors to have it done as best they can in that 12 to 15 month time frame. Now the good news is, any of you that had your survey before November 29th, then you're okay for your another annual. So you kind of have a little bit of a breathing room until next annual survey, when they will come back in and they will be surveying you with the new regs. But I also want you to keep in mind, at any time, you could have a complaint survey visit where they come and they are investigating a complaint, and that will be based off of the new survey guidelines, but it will also be focusing on that complaint. So any facilities that have been waiting for their annual survey, as of yesterday, will be surveyed under the new survey guidance. And when we talk about these F tags, they tie into citations or non-compliance, and they are assigned a deficiency. So Appendix PP is where the surveyor guidance is, and it's kind of separated into three parts, where one is the survey tag number. It's assigned a number, and then it's assigned some sort of verbiage that talks and ties it into the regulation. And then the third part is what the surveyors need to do to interpret that what they found you non-compliant in your building is what's going to tie back to the guidance and the number that gets assigned. So that's a federal F tag. And like I said, you're going to be hearing me talk about Appendix PP, and that we had a clarification that was sent out to us just right after Thanksgiving that had a few updates. Otherwise, we had been given it back in July and a little bit in September. So they've been working on their Appendix PP, and now they're more or less ready to use it. So let's go and take a look at what we have for the whole entire F tag. So here is what I call the master list or the mother load. This is what all the F tags that are in play when a surveyor comes out are listed on these two pages. This is the first page. And anything you see in red, obviously red makes it pop out, but those are what CMS has decided is substandard quality of care. So these are the areas that can be cited at what we call a level of F, H, I, J, K, or L. And you'll see the grid later in the presentation, but that's the upper layer of the grid, which is the worst areas to be cited for. So these are not good things, and also thus the red coloring. But when they did this, they also went ahead and they gave categories so that certain tags go under resident rights, certain tags go under freedom from abuse. Obviously, when we take a look at it, we can see the ones that are highlighted in yellow that we talk about food and nutrition services. So anything that pertains to our areas as CDMs is put under food and nutrition. But that doesn't mean that we can't thread through and that we don't have areas under quality of care. We could fall under a quality of life, resident right tag. But once again, each discipline has a heading a category, but then you can also be under the categories for the quality of care groupings. So keep that in mind. Now, I have dietary tags, and the bulk of them listed there. We come under the new numbers of F800 to 816. For years, those of us that have been in the field for a while, we've been used to being like sanitation was always F371. F325 had to do with menus and nutrition. So we were kind of in the 300 grouping before, and now they pulled us into the 800s. When they started this renumbering, they started with 550. So gone are the days of the 100 F tags to 300s. We've moved kind of further down the numbering system. And that word dietary, this is probably the last time you should see this. We have now evolved, and we are now being referred to in the world of CMS. They did a relabeling. So now we are the Food and Nutrition Services. And our grouping came under that 483.60, which is the actual regulatory language. And we have 15 tags that go with that, from F800 to F814. And once again, this rolled out Tuesday of this year, and they're going to add more F tags in November of 2019. So that will increase from 179 total up to 190. Now, do we know exactly what those tags are for phase 3? Not yet. We've given a little bit of heads up, but that's kind of a wait and see measure. So these are what the surveyors are assigning you your grading. So like when you went to school, you got an A, you got a B, you got a C, you got a D. Unfortunately, some of us might have got F, but now we're getting tagged on our grades are the tags. Where are you getting tagged? What is the number? And then we're going to get a scope and severity that goes with that. So we're going to first focus on exactly what is a tag and how does that tag tie into what it does for us. So our food and nutrition services, for us to understand our roles in keeping our residents fed and safe and a dignified manner, all of the way that we give that quality care is going to come under that heading. But like I said before, it threads throughout other areas. So we might be looking at nutrition and hydration, which falls under F692, which is a tag under quality of care. Same way with tube feedings. They're going to come under 693, which is a quality of care. So that comes into another regulatory grouping. And then we could get citations for food and dining way in to 948, which has to do with training requirements. That PNA is that paid nutritional assistant. If you're using that in your buildings, it goes in under a training. And amazingly enough, that training an RN is in charge of. So it comes in a different category. We also have QAPI, our quality assurance programs, coming in under 865 to 868. And that is a grouping all for itself. QAPI has its own grouping. So once again, it kind of threads throughout other areas that serve the residents as well. A&FP, we've made a crosswalk specific for our nutrition, our food and nutrition, and we've taken and supplied you with what the old F tag was and what the new F tag was, and an abridged 2-pager so that you can have this as a handy tool to reflect to versus going back to the master document with all the groupings on it. And that can be found at our A&FP online on our webpage, and it will also be linked under the Phase 2 of our new redesigned webpage. So once again, I've highlighted F371. That is still, as of Tuesday, we don't have new results yet from our new survey, but F371 has always been one of the top 10 tags nationwide. And it's still, right now, in the top 5. So this time around, we have 2 different groupings. F371 was split to be F812 and F813, where they're saying, okay, we're going to split it into 2, and it's going to be food procurement, store, prepare, and serve in a sanitary fashion. That's 812, and then 813 is going to go for personal food policy. So they've split it. What are our sanitary actions, and what are the policies to go with it? I don't know if this is going to minimize F371 now that we have 2 categories that it can go into, but I think it's kind of a good marriage by splitting that out into 2. So be aware, that's probably the one that we have the most challenge with as CDMs, and that's the one the surveyors seem to target us on, and those are 2 huge areas for us to be prepared and be ready to be up to date on all our policies and understand how we perform the task to meet the regulation. So CDM competencies. I want to tie our CDM competencies and turn it into some sort of an FTAG blueprint so you know where to go, understanding what your role is and what your CDM education has brought for you to healthcare, and then tying it back into where do I go to find the specific surveyor guidance on how I'm going to perform my competencies. And one of the big things that we hope that you're slowly getting towards is being competent in your competencies. That confidence is what's going to make you successful in your roles as CDMs and also in your surveys. If you can be confident when you're talking to a surveyor, and the surveyor can see you have a good understanding of your role to lead that department, it's a win-win. You're only as weak as your weakest link. So if you're feeling less confident in certain areas of these competencies, that should be your goal, your personal career goal is I need to work harder at these things on my competencies. A good example for me is I've always kind of been a little bit scared of tube feedings and a little bit unsure of myself, and I always had a really good dietitian to work with me on. But I always knew that when I had an admission that was a tube feeding and I needed to kind of do some documentation or start the assessing process in the absence of my dietitian, I always knew that I needed to, I had a cheat sheet so that I could get through that, because I knew that was one of the areas that I constantly needed to educate myself on because I didn't use it that much, but it was a competency that I wasn't that confident in, but that I knew that if I keep continuing to educate myself in there, that I would be a better person just to assess that, and maybe I wouldn't be as scared of taking those type of residents under my wing. So here is the actual CDM scope of practice, and that is on the ANFP website as well. And I would highly encourage all of you to have a copy of this somewhere in your office so that this document can be shared. That tells a lot about our career path, and that the Certified Dietary Manager, Certified Food Protection Professional, our CFPP, that we are solid in these areas of our competencies. So let's take a look at this FTAG crosswalk and use it as your reference. So if we were saying that you can conduct routine client nutritional screening, which includes food and fluid intake information, that is the first one out of the gate on our scope and practice. That competency then will tie back into FTAG 656 and 692. So if we go back and we look at our copy, we'll say, okay, 656 and 692 are in 2 different categories. One is listed under the Comprehensive Resident Care Plan, which that makes sense because usually if we're getting ready to do a nutritional screening, it's going to help us build that care plan for our resident. And then we look at 692. That's one of the quality of care indicators. And 692 is nutrition and hydration status maintenance. So that all ties together. So once again, looking at our crosswalk, we can go in and we can say, okay, I need to take a look at what all is involved under 692, the nutrition hydration status. So I'm going to look for 483.25, the quality of care. I can go into my Appendix PP and I can take a look and see what is listed there for the descriptor of the regulatory information, what the intent is, and what the guidance is for the surveyors, so that they too, have an understanding of what is involved in nutrition and hydration status. So let's pop down a little bit further on where you see the other gray arrow at F800, implement diet plans and diet orders using appropriate modifications. So F800, once again, it falls under our wheelhouse of 483.60, and that is that we're going to take a look at what the diets are. So that tag is provided diet meets needs of each resident. So, once again, we'll pull up our wonderful copy of Appendix PP, and it says there, the facility must provide each resident with a nourishing, palatable, well-balanced diet that meets his or her daily nutritional and special dietary needs, taking into consideration the preferences of each resident. So once again, there's a whole bunch of information there that says what the intent is to deliver and meet that regulation, and what the guidance is, and how the surveyors are going to take a look at that when they come in and do their annual survey. So once again, take a look at that. It tells exactly, based off of the groups here, like I showed you. And coming back to the rest of the scope of practice, we have that all listed out. Notice, like I told you, there's 600 tags as well as 800 tags. If you look at the one that's F803 and 692, that's developing and implementing menus that meet the individual needs. 803 is the tag listed under Food Nutrition Services, and that's menus meet residents' needs, prepped in advance, and they're followed. And then we look at 692, and lo and behold, that's coming back under the quality of care, that nutrition and hydration status maintenance. So once again, dual areas for one item. Let's take a look at F865 and 868, and that's talking about managing goals and priorities for the department, establishing short and long-term goals, and communicating internally and externally. And once again, this is an 865 and an 868 reference, and that is your quality assurance and performance improvement. So that is your QAPI. So that is in here as well. So just to kind of recap, our scope of practice is our blueprint of how we do our jobs. So carry that blueprint out and follow the F tags. It's kind of like Hansel and Gretel going through the woods. We're following the breadcrumbs that the surveyors are giving us so that we can all meet together and have a happy outcome. So you're going to start reviewing these things and taking a look at them. I know a lot of us knew what F371 was before. They changed it. But like I said, F371 now split into 2 tags. So it will behoove you to go back and reread the guidance to see what the differences are. CMS has spent quite a bit of time getting more components added in there, so we have resident voice and resident choice throughout. That is very important to everyone to see that we're doing well person-centered cares. And dietary, we've always had that component in what we've done because we've always wanted to have high satisfaction scores. We've always wanted to give them various offerings. We've evolved from, offering just one menu. We have selective menus. We have different ways of serving out. We've tried the buffet. We've tried the farmhouse style dining. We now do choices. We order at the table. We even have gotten far as room trays. You can, order ahead. So we're giving them more choices when it comes to their meals. We're giving them choices in what times they eat. If we have a breakfast buffet where we have, open dining at our meals, that's also a choice they have. So revisit all these things and take a look and see if what you're offering, your type of service, the way your kitchen and your dining rooms are being run, do they fit in with the regulations? Is it something I need to change? Yesterday I had a question from a student at one of the colleges here. They, once a week, have a chef go out and he does like a chef demo in the dining room and actually cook something on a hot plate for them, so that the residents get to watch him and they get to smell it and see it, and it's just really fun. And the surveyors were in the building and they saw this happening, and immediately, the administrator, the director of nursing, was all nervous that they were going to get called out because they were worried they needed a hood and all the regulations maintenance-wise, what happens if it catches fire, and so this was one of the things that she had asked. I'm giving them a new choice, and it's something that's very well liked. We're still following the menu. We're not going to be, the surveyors liked what they saw. They weren't going to tag them for anything. Now, were the life safety codes at risk? We don't know. The surveyors now are surveying pretty much without looking at an environmental. The environmental piece that the surveyors used to do, they've now decided to hand that back to the fire marshal. So the fire marshal will do your life safety codes. And so for the survey, they were pleased with what they saw. The residents were getting choices. Now, is that something that maybe should be more of an activity versus a dining thing? That's something that can be looked at. But it made them relook, as a dietary department, relook at all the regulations and if they were violating any of them, to make sure they were still able to offer that, which they were. So the survey pathways. A while back I did a part one of the new survey and the pathways that were involved with that. And CMS has put out pathway critical elements, they call them, the CE pathways, and they use this for the surveyor. So along with these new F tags, you should be familiarizing yourself with what the critical element pathways are, so that you know exactly when that surveyor walks in your building, how the flow of the survey is going to be. And once again, it's new for the surveyors, it's new for us, but the more information you have prepared before they come to your building, and the more confident you are in your competencies, the better the interaction between you and the surveyors are going to be, because you know, based off of the F tags and the competencies and the surveyor pathway, just where you need to be to have your department in compliance with the regulations. So let's take a peek here. So another area to hone in on is to look at dining observation. You have a kitchen observation and you have a dining observation pathway. And included in those observations are kind of a checkoff sheet with boxes, and I absolutely love it. It's the easiest thing to use for a mock survey. So if you want to go in and use these observations, get your clipboard, act like you're the surveyor, and start doing these observations before your survey comes to you. You're going to have yourself and your staff prepared for some of the questions, and they're going to be you can find out if it's something you need to train more on, if your cooks aren't following part of the dining or the kitchen, they're seeing things, and you can hone in on what's my dietary aid competency, what's my cook's competency. And here they list the F tags under the observations. So if we look at the one highlighted in yellow, does staff distribute and serve food under sanitary conditions? There we go, the old F371, now F812. If you were reviewing that and you were doing your mock survey with your staff and you don't think that they're following sanitary conditions, something as simple as maybe they buttered the toast without wearing gloves for that resident, or they were touching the bread that they were buttering. That's not sanitary. Or hairnets, God forbid, a hairnet wasn't worn in the kitchen. So you would check no, and then you would know, okay, I need to review F812, and talk to my staff and educate them about that because I found them deficient in this area. So that's your dining observation pathway. We also have those posted on the ANFP website under Path 2, so you can go in, or Phase 2, you can go in and pull that off of there. Here's another one that goes outside of the 800 numbering, and I really like this one because I think this is one that we tend to share the love with. This is not something that's totally dietary. It can be a maintenance, it can be a housekeeping, but did the facility provide a home-like dining experience? And if you mark no here, that comes in under resident rights. So 584 is a resident rights, and that is safe, clean, comfortable, home-like environment. So that F tag has a lot to be said. So if you have a dining room that has really bad flooring and you're fighting to get that floor replaced, now is the time to point that out. That under this dining observation, this is what the surveyor is going to grade me on, and I'm saying we don't meet the home-like environment because, for example, the cracked floor tiles, or, you know, if there's something, if paint chips, if it needs to be painted. But take a look at it and say, do I have a home-like environment in my dining room? So once again, look outside of the food and nutrition numbering system and pull the threads together of all the other areas that are impacted as well by our dining room and our kitchen. So here's the critical element pathway for kitchen observation. And once again, we have F tags showing up. During the initial brief tour, the residents, you need to be ready. They're going to come in the first day of survey. They're going to come in and they're going to do the first meal that they're there for. They're going to sit and keep an eye on that first meal. They're going to watch the dining room. So on that initial tour, did they see something that wasn't stored, bagging and tagging? Did they go in your storeroom and found something, you know, the powdered sugar is open and it's not in a Ziploc bag and there's no date on it? Or did they see something that wasn't sanitary? Could be one of your cooks has a beard and wasn't wearing a beard guard. There we are. We're going to mark no, and it's going to be under 812, which is our lovely sanitation tag. And that is the one that talks about if you are foods procurement, store, prepare, serve under sanitary conditions. The next one, also during the initial tour. So hone in on a lot of these initial tours because that's what's happened right away when the surveyor breaks the threshold of your front door. And this is handle, prepare, distribute food in a manner that prevents foodborne illnesses. So food safety. And that's coming under 880, F880. And checking on our sheets, that is infection prevention and control. And that's the facility as a whole. This could be something as simple as a room tray went down to the room and the CNA, when they were getting stuff off the tray, they didn't handle it in a sanitary manner, or say it was something that needed gloves or needed paper plates. If it was a true infection control area, or if it was a room that was quarantined, this could fall under 880 for infection prevention and control. Okay, so I've kind of blown your mind a little bit. We're to that point where we need to talk more about Appendix PP. And the new surveyor guidance is listed in this Appendix PP. And it's a whopper. I think there's like, 700 pages to this. It's huge. What I have done, and have my own desk copy, is I just went in there and I pulled out F483.60, just the food and nutrition services section of it. And I've listed on here, when we start with F800, that's the start of the food and nutrition service tags. It is actually starting on page 532 to 573. So if you were to use this link, that would take you to the PP reference, and if you would go in, it's a PDF document, so you can go in and you can print that range, 532 to 573. Highly suggest, save a tree, do it double-sided. It will print out the guidance just for food and nutrition services. And on there, it will also, right now you have other potential tags for further investigation that's listed. So, for example, if we were taking a look at F807, which is each resident receives and the facility provides food and drink, it tells you that other potential investigations could include comprehensive assessments, comprehensive care plans, the resident's right to make treatment decisions. So that is listed in this PP. So when you go through and you find out what's involved under 807, F-tag 807, at the end it will tell you what other potential tags you need to look at. So once again, they write the description of the actual federal regulation, then they list the intent, and then they go into a guidance, and then they go into probes. So when we talk about a probe, that's where the surveyor, it's kind of like dipping their toe in the pond. They're going to see where it takes them. So kind of the ripple effect. So if we were going to take a probe, where are the concerns? How do I determine if it's a concern? Do we have a nutritional professional on staff? And if there are concerns, where are they coming from? Is it coming from family complaints, resident complaints? And how is your building managing those complaints? So once again, you're being on top of this is forewarned. You know by reviewing and looking through this what the expectations are and how the surveyors are going to come in and take a look at that. And I think that knowing the federal reg and getting as comfortable with it now and knowing that things could change or interpretations, could be different, it's worthy of a discussion now. If the surveyors are in your building and it's new to them and you guys can have a good discussion and you have a good rapport with the surveyors, I think having that understanding makes your job and makes your department more efficient. Yesterday, I have a building not too far from my home where 4 surveyors walked in. So this is what we know is one of the first surveys happening under the new survey rules. So we're kind of monitoring that and seeing where we're going with this. The curious point of this is the building just had a new dietary manager. She's a CVM/RD. She got hired recently, so she's going to cover both roles. So it's going to be interesting for her because she has stepped away from the position for some years. She's going to be back into it, and it's going to be cool to see. And we're kind of monitoring how the survey's going because, as far as I can tell, one of those surveyors is a trainer. So they're taking the opportunity to bring along a trainee. So it's going to be new, and it's going to be kind of maybe scary, but I think it's going to be interesting to see how the partnership is going to be. They came in on Wednesday. They've already told the building they're probably not going to exit before next Thursday. So that's a long time. That's a long time to have your friends in the building with you. But like I said, it could take longer. We're hoping that most of these surveys take 4 days, 3 to 4 days, but we won't know. Time will tell. So once again, familiarize yourself with Appendix PP. For gosh sakes, don't print it all. Just go for the range that I've given you there. Have a copy of the F-tag crosswalk so you can kind of see where that needs to go. And then you're kind of ready for a little bit of good bedtime reading. You need to get through these. And like I said, take it little tidbits at a time. It's too much to digest at once, but there's a lot of good information here. So just as a little break, I love Maxine. I love this slide, and I can tell you we've had quite a few dietary managers here in the state I'm from that were hired before last November, and they're on a 5-year plan, and some of them have, pretty much, we have those people in all walks of healthcare that are saying, you know what, I'm old enough, I'm going to retire, so they're going to go south. Because it is a lot of new stuff, but it's also interesting. I've also had a lot of older nurses, dietary personnel that have said, you know what, this is really good. I like seeing that we're giving the resident more choice. Just the fact that maybe they can decide what time they want to go to bed. They can decide if they want to have more than 2 baths a week. They can decide if they want continental breakfast over getting up at 7:30 for the full breakfast. It's just kind of good that we're giving everybody those choices, and it's working. So kudos for what you do. Keep up the good work. I know this is a lot. So let's take a look and see just what the grades are. We know what they're going to be looking at. Let's check out what scope and severity brings to it. So when they come for the annual survey, there's going to be an exit conference. Sometimes in the past we've had many daily exits where when they leave after day 1, they share some things. Day 2, that's kind of going to go by the wayside. They're going to do an exit conference where they're going to say, we're done. Now we're going to go back and send all the information back to our headquarters, their bosses. But we're going to give you some preliminary findings. We're going to share some observations, and we want to give it to all the leadership teams. And this is where, as you, the certified dietary manager, you are part of the leadership. You will be setting in on this exit conference. Even though they've spent time with you in your kitchen and your dining room, and they may have given you some heads up, they may have given you some FYIs, but they're going to share what their findings are in each and every department at this exit conference. So once they've had the conference, then you're going to wait and see. It's a wait and see if what they told you was a preliminary finding. When it goes back to the main office and their bosses take a look at it, they're going to decide if it's a deficiency, and then they're going to go ahead and say, how are we going to grade this deficiency? And so CMS has a form called the 2567 that comes to you in the mail that talks about the statements of your deficiencies. And a really interesting thing to note about some of the information that they shared, CMS shared last week, when they talked about the letter of deficiencies being sent to the facilities, they've included some new verbiage or some new acronyms that I find interesting. So when your facility receives your citing determination letter, you could see suggestions from them to say, this is an enforcement remedy that we would like for you to take action on in your building. And they may call something a DPOC, a DPOC, which stands for Directed Plan of Correction. And once again, we used to, whenever you're non-compliant, You've always had to have a plan of correction to share with the powers that be that this is what we're going to do to remedy that deficiency so that we come back into compliance. So now that's a direct plan of correction, and it's the structures, policies, and processes needed for the facility to demonstrate and maintain substantial compliance. So that's a DPOC. And then they had something called a DIST, a DIST. And that is another version called a Directed In-Service Training. And they're calling this an enforcement remedy that they decided that education is likely the measure to correct the deficiencies and to help the facility achieve and sustain substantial compliance. So they're saying for this directed in-service training to be used effectively and appropriately, the deficiency findings should demonstrate that a knowledge deficient significantly contributed to the deficiency. So what you need to show here is if it was truly a training issue, say it was a hand washing issue and you had not provided any hand washing and services or trainings or could show any competencies for hand washing, then they're going to say to you, we feel that a DIST, a directed in-service training on hand washing for all the personnel in your facility that have the direct contact with food need to be there. The relevant staff to the facility has to attend, and it has to be documented and signed, sealed, and delivered. That's what I call it. So that is something new, that we've got this direct in-service training as a directive coming from CMS and from your state survey entities. Like I said, the plan of correction, the POC is what we called it before. Now it's a directed plan of correction. That has always more or less been there. But like I said, just wanted to give you a heads up that, we have this new directed in-service training, this DIST, as some verbiage that you could see on your letter of determination for your sightings. I also put in there what I've been talking about all along, that the dialogue you have with your surveyors and that your staff has with the surveyors, we always say, don't be comfortable enough as staff to tell jokes or your personal life story, but be comfortable enough to be pleasant, to answer questions. If you don't know the answer, don't make it up. Tell them that you're not sure, but you'll get back to them. But just having that rapport so that they feel like your staff and you yourself as their leader are attentive, and you view this as a learning experience to better your department and what you do for your residents. So, possible citations. What do we see through the eyes of the surveyors? What's good? What's bad? Once again, they're in, they do their survey. You see them writing feverishly on their little clipboards. A lot of them keep it close to the chest. You might not know what's going on. I like surveyors that visit with you and maybe, give you a heads up that, maybe that little corner over there shouldn't be as grungy, or, I would like to see. Usually if a surveyor says, I would like to see that thermometer brought to the front of the freezer or at eye level, that's kind of your heads up to do it immediately. But once again, the potential for citation comes at what the surveyor is seeing. And we don't always get the joy of having the state dietitians in our buildings. Usually they're nurses that have been trained in diet, food and nutrition. I almost said it again, but in food and nutrition services, they've been given an overview of what they need to look for. So, scope and severity, that comes into the citation, those exit conferences. And here's another big one. If the citations and if the surveyors feel that what they found needs a lot of work and that there's a lot of residents that have potential for harm from their findings, they can extend the survey to be longer. And it's kind of like, the old adage, when family stays too long, it's kind of like having old fish. You don't really want them to stay longer. It's very stressful. But if the need is there, they will go for an extended survey. If your citation and your deficiency warrants it, and if it's in a high enough level on the grid, which you will see momentarily, then you're going to have a revisit. You're going to have a resurvey or a revisit where they come back to make sure that your plan of correction or your DIS, your in-service training, was sufficient. So if you tell them this is what you're going to do, make good on it. Depending on where you are on the grid, if it's going to trigger a revisit or not. In general, if you do a plan of correction, you need to follow that, even if you're not having a revisit. That is making your department better and stronger and compliant. It should be survey every day. Your staff should be well trained, and you as a leader should be able to lead by example and share this knowledge so that you're always challenging their competencies. You know, we need to be better at this, or don't slack off here. When you're taking temperatures, we need the temperatures to be taken, those kind of things. So general objectives for survey citations. So this is going to talk about scope and severity. It's going to talk about the grid. So when we talk about the severity level, that is the effect on the resident. How is this harming the resident? And then when we talk about the scope, we want to know how many of our residents does this have an impact on? What's the potential ramifications for me not having the lid on the garbage can in the kitchen after my shift has ended? What's the impact of that? Is that going to be a widespread? Is it limited? So they take a look at those things. What is the resident outcome? How many potential residents could it harm? And then they're going to go in and take a look at, is it substantial compliance or is it non-compliant? And when a facility is non-compliant, they're going to take a look at what practices are deficient. So once again, it comes back to our scope of practice. It comes back to policies and procedures that you have in place, your staff competencies, how are you tracking that? Once they decide that we have a citation, they're going to go back and they want to see how are you ensuring that this is happening? And then they're going to go in and they're going to say, let's take a look at the grid, and we're going to decide what the scope and severity is. So here's the magical grid. And the scope is listed there in green, and the severity is listed in pink, and then there's some other colors. But the lower tier, the next tier, so it's tiered up, and it's based off of the severity, the impact of how many residents, and then it's decided, is it an isolated incident, is there a pattern, or is it widespread? So this is the magical grid. And when I was doing research for this, I had hit numbers, articles that were saying as high as 90% of healthcare facility staff have no idea what this grid is about. They have no idea if they were given a G-level tag or if their non-compliance with this came out to a D level. They have no idea what the letter is and what this grid is. And I think it's kind of like we need to know what the grading is so that we can better understand where we need to be and how much we need to work to get the grading off. Of course, we would all love to have deficiency-free surveys. A lot of dietary and food and nutrition services departments have deficiency-free surveys. It's really sweet when you have the whole entire building be deficiency-free, but that is a hard accomplishment, but it's a huge accomplishment, and it does happen. So let's take a look at scope. We talk about the scope as isolated or a pattern. If it's isolated, once again, it's very limited. A very small number of residents are affected by this. They have what they call a rule of thumb, which if it affects 3 or fewer residents, then they consider it isolated. A good isolated could be maybe you have one resident that this affects. It could be something to do with the resident's dentures, the resident's dentures were lost, and they're having trouble eating them. And when the surveyors were there, no one knew that the dentures were lost. So this could be isolated. This resident, at this point in time, it's only that resident that lost their dentures. Now, if everybody in the building had lost their dentures because somebody decided to gather them up at bedtime and take them off somewhere else to be cleaned, and they never got back to the resident, then you have an issue. But isolated means 3 or less residents were affected. If we see a pattern, rule of thumb for this is more residents were affected, and rule of thumb, 75%. So deficiency would be it affects more than 3 residents, but less than 75% of your census or your residents in your building. Then it's considered a pattern. Then if we talk about widespread, this is that it affects 75% or more of your population. So a good example of widespread, it could be that you have old-fashioned, this could be like an environmental or maintenance, but you have an old-fashioned radiator system, and all your beds are scooted towards the window up against the radiators because that's the only placement. That's how the beds have always been. The resident on that side of the room, their bed's on the radiator. A resident could move their leg and get it burned off of the radiator. And so they would come in and say, all the beds are up against the radiators, so all the residents have a potential for burning themselves because of this radiator. So that could be widespread. So we talk about the bottom level, the ABC tags, no actual harm, potential for minimum or negative impact. So not very serious. If you're going to get a tag, if you can't be deficiency-free, ABCs are nice to be. That was my little mantra. If I couldn't get a clear scorecard, the ABCs were nice to be because they were the lower levels. Then we move on up to the DEFs. D&Es, they're okay. Not really actual harm. Minimal harm, no immediate jeopardy, so that doesn't mean somebody wasn't immediate danger or we'd put them at immediate risk. It was very minimal. And then we have the F there. So D&E, one color, F, darker blue. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. Then we go up to the third row. And these are not good. These are actual harm that is not immediate jeopardy. So we're harming the resident in some way, but they're not in immediate danger. So actual harm occurred, could be a bruise, a skin tear, the resident being made upset. That could result in the G, H, and I. We see a lot of wounds as a G tag. So, like I said, there's also been dietary tags under Gs. So we'll take a look at that. Now here's the worst. When you get to the top, you don't want to be at the top of this grid. This is what we call immediate jeopardy to resident health or safety. And once again, safety. Life safety codes play in big here. If we talk about the cares, but also the physical building. Is it going to cave in? Are the walls falling in? If that is immediate jeopardy, then the residents need to be removed from that harm. So we have immediate jeopardy. That's what we call an IJ. So if you have an IJ, you come and you hear our building was just issued an IJ citation, that means it's immediate jeopardy. And once again, the harm is there. And it's up to the surveyors to decide what we're going to do with this building. If you don't come in within compliance within a certain number of days, it could be something that they could shut down the building. They can also deny payment for Medicare and Medicaid. This is a very serious category. J, K, and L are the tags you don't want to see, and especially if it's also tagged with being an IJ. A lot of times you just hear it's an IJ and you don't even know if it's a JKL. It's classified as immediate jeopardy. This is bad, and this is where we're going with it. So, once again, I hope none of you go to that level because it's just very scary. We did hear from CMS that this first year, starting November 28th till next November 28th of 2018, there are going to be no monetary fines with the exception of anybody that's in immediate jeopardy. They had to stop and say, we're not going to fine you, for example, a good fine to use would be if you did not perform a criminal background check, that's a $500 immediate fine. That's just, we caught you, you didn't do it, you're going to be fined $500. Those kind of tags with money like that, that's not going to happen. But they're going to keep the immediate jeopardy fines because that is where we definitely have the residents at risk. So immediate jeopardies, they can range from $3,050 to $10,000 per day. So these are really, really can add up to a lot. A good example, elopement. The resident leaves your building on July 1st, survey came in on November 1st, and they discovered that your door alarm still isn't working correctly, and it started July 1st. November 1st, they found that you'd done nothing with it. So that's 4 months where they can say your residents were in immediate jeopardy for elopement, so the Wonder Guards weren't being able to trigger or whatever, and we can give you a 4-month per day fine. So that can quickly add up. So that's your immediate jeopardy. So we talk about the darker blue colors. The F, I, J, and K, they're what we call substandard. If you remember back in the beginning when we talked about the crosswalk for the F tags, anything in red, any of those tags are what we call substandard. And they come in substandard quality of care. The areas were in resident rights, freedom from abuse and neglect, quality of care, so quality of life, quality of cares, your resident behavior, and your facility practices. Those are what are considered substandard, and they build up that corner of the grid, and they can lead to the revisits, the fines, all that kind of stuff happens in that quadrant of the grid. Okay, so you saw the grid. Let's talk a little bit now about how this affects food and nutrition services. So I put this in here about the requirement for every building in the United States that takes Medicare and Medicaid dollars as of midnight on Tuesday has to employ a certified dietary manager. Okay? So if the building does not have a certified dietary manager in place, or that food service director that was hired before November 28th of 2016, they have 5 years to get it. So they would look and say, okay, when were you hired? If you met the 5-year criteria, then you have time to get it. If you didn't, then as of Tuesday at midnight, November 28th of this year, you had to be certified. So how do we take a look at this? How is this going to be interpreted? I can tell you that the survey that's happening now this week, the surveyors have gone in. They have asked to see the certification for the food service supervisor. And, you know, you're going to be presenting it, and then you're going to let them know, you know, what do I have? Am I compliant or am I not compliant? So if you're not a CDM and you need to be, and you're not under that 5-year, I don't want to call it a grandfather, but if you're not in the 5-year clause based off of your hire date, in your facility, then you're out of compliance. You are considered to be non-compliant with the regs. So that's a given. There's no discussion. You can't provide the documentation, you're non-compliant. So what we're hearing is you need to have a plan. So they come in and they say you don't meet the qualifications to be the food service director based on the regulations that went into effect in 2016. You didn't get your CDM, within this year from 2016 to 2017 if you're a new hire. You're non-compliant. So what is your plan? So have a plan in place. You can already share with your administrator, we're going to be considered non-compliant. We need to have a plan. So in that plan, you should have something showing that you're pursuing the education, that you're doing due diligence. So if you're enrolled in a course, have your enrollment paperwork on hand. It can be in your HR file. Show that. Have a timeline in mind that you can share with them. Maybe you're 3/4 of the way through the course and you're planning to take the exam in the late spring, or say I'm completing the course on this date and I will sit for the exam on this date. So the more you can show the surveyors that you're seeking compliance and this is what you're doing, then they'll have the information they need for the determination. Because what will happen is one of their bosses higher up in your state, when they turn in their list of citations, they will review this and they will say, okay, what was the plan? What did the facility have planned for this to become compliant? And then they'll determine where you're going to be at on that scope and severity grid. We don't know if it's going to be an ABC. We don't know if it's going to be a DEF. Once again, we're on the wait and see pattern. But do your due diligence. Provide them with a plan that you have worked out with your administrator on where you're going to seek the CDM or the food service director qualifications so that you have that planned out and have it available when they come into your building. Okay, I like to live and learn from what others have done. I will not say it's the most enlightening of information, but taking a look at survey history, taking a look at your neighbor buildings, you can always go into the report cards for your state survey entities and see what happened in regards to surveys. You can also find this information on Nursing Home Compare. There's ways of going in and seeing just where you're at. If you're newly hired to a building, you might want to go in and take a look at what was their survey history in the past. When you come for an interview, you might ask, if you're thinking of changing facilities, what was your survey history for dietary in the past? Because we can learn from what others have done. I can tell you last week, a building got cited for having a scoop in a thickener can. Nursing went over to the counter, got the thickener, got their little scoop, thickened the residents' liquids, and it was nursing that was taking care of it at an assisted dining table. And then, lo and behold, when I went to put the can back over on the counter, they took the scoop, threw it in the can, put the lid on it, set it back over in the cupboard where it belonged. At the same time, the surveyor's just frantically writing because that scoop should not have been in that container because it contaminated it. Yes, it wasn't dietary. Yes, it was nursing. But once again, it came back and became a dietary citation. And it was one of those things, you can educate, carry a big stick, but you have to stay on top of it. So by knowing that, the state dietitian at a college yesterday was doing a presentation, and she brought that up just last week. This was what I cited someone for. So learn from it. Go back and make sure you have things in place that, and educate people right up to the time the surveyors are there. Please remember, don't put the scoop back in the ice machine or don't put the scoop back in the flour bin. So we can learn from others' mistakes. So here's some scope and severity examples for dietary. So let's take a look at that F363, and keep in mind, this was still from the old survey tags and survey numbers. We don't have any information yet. We'll probably be seeing that January, February. So by the time ACE rolls around, our conference in Orlando, we should have some good examples of what has been found. But here is a scope and severity that S&S equals a D level. So the menus didn't meet the residents' needs and prepped in advance. And once again, this has to do with scoop sizes and the fact that it was a pureed consistency. They pureed up hash brown casserole. Wrong scoop was used, so the resident didn't get enough of the nutrient value that was intended by giving them that portion. So it resulted in a scope and severity of a D. And if we go back and remember, that is no actual harm with potential for more than minimal harm. So that is the second row, the second tier of our grid, and that comes under column 1. And they considered it an isolated incident because it was that resident that had a pureed diet. So that's, how we could take a look at that. So this building for their plan of correction, which I didn't include on here, was education. Education and posting the procedure for pureeing and double-checking their menu spreadsheets. So they had a really thorough plan of correction in place, and it was accepted by the surveyors, and they have moved on. And this would be something I would audit on. Once you get called out on something, you need to do routine audits after the fact to make sure that they're still doing it. And here's F325, that was maintain nutrition status unless unavoidable. And this one was scope and severity of a G level. So here we go. This is one of the upper tiers, and it was considered isolated, but it's in the third tier, and actual harm that is not immediate jeopardy. And it's not good. A dietary tag that's G is disconcerting to me, just because it's pretty blatant. So this one is based off of a record review, and this resident refused breakfast, wanted to sleep later, and because of that, this resident was on a supplement, and because the supplement was given at breakfast, it was forgotten. Obviously, they didn't see that they went back in later and said, George, you didn't have breakfast and you didn't get your supplement, so here it is a little bit later. He had significant weight loss once they reviewed the weights, followed up with the clinical documentation. He was on a weight loss supplement program, and it wasn't being followed. So once again, a huge impact for this resident. It was isolated. It was just him. Now, if they found out that no one was getting their morning supplements, then it would have been widespread, and that G tag would have moved to an H, which would have been a pattern. But in this case, it was isolated to this one resident, but it still met the criteria for a G level. And then that other one at the top, where 2 residents have dementia, were regularly observed during survey to have food spillage on their shirts and faces several hours after breakfast and lunch. And this is a dignity tag, and this could come in dining because it was in the dining room, and it could also come with environment, it could come with nursing. But it was cited for a D because of a potential dignity issue. And how many times have we said to the nursing staff as they're wheeling a resident out of our dining rooms, please, we need to take off the clothing protector, or please, we need to wipe off the food particles, get them, wiped off at the table with their napkin before they leave, so that, they're clean and they look nice when they leave our dining rooms. It's just one of those things to get in the habit of making note of. Are the CNAs, are they looking for that when they assist residents back to their rooms, so that we're covering the dignity issue? So here's a hot and heavy one. This one is bad. This was a $5,000 fine for a facility, and it was cited at a level L. which definitely is not good. It's at the top of the grid, one of the worst tags, and it was immediate jeopardy. What they found out was that this facility was having issues paying their bills. They weren't paying their food vendors. The food vendor wasn't coming very regularly, and orders weren't coming as often as they should have. So the residents weren't getting their meals as they should, and they weren't following a menu. They were feeding them what they had, and it was just a very unfortunate situation. And I think at this same time, there might have been a corporation change out where the building was changing hands. But once again, it comes down to we have to meet the needs of our residents. And 3 meals a day is what they're to be fed, and this is the food needs to be there. So this one was not a good situation, and it was immediate jeopardy. Everybody in the building was not like that. It was just one person that was affected. Everybody was affected by not having enough food on hand. So that one was a nasty one, and those kind of things happen. But there we go, scope and severity of an L. Here's another one with a G tag, had to do with the facility in regards to the nutritional status. Once again, it's what we do and how we assess our residents based off of weight loss. Weight loss is huge. It's also one of those frustrations that we might not get regular weights, and it might be like pulling teeth to get weights. But I can tell you, it can go significant if they find that you have more than one person that's having weight loss and it's not being addressed properly or assessed, or they're not being given the supplements or the proteins. It can go from a G, H, or I, depending on how widespread it is. So get your registered dietitian support on this and watch your weights and figure out ways to make sure that they're accurate. There's, if you see a wacky weight, a 3-day reweigh to see, to balance it out, to see if you've got the correct weight to start from, or if something went wrong with, if it was a scale or whatever. So that can go to a scope and severity of a G. So that G tag I just showed you, it actually resulted in an ouchie, and that was a $2,500 fine. And the reason for this facility had the same issue 2 or 3 years in a row. This was a repeat issue. Obviously, their plan of correction they were not following from the previous 2 surveys, so this resulted in a fine amount of $2,500. And when I talk about giving choices and stuff, I was coming across reading Deficiencies, and it was brought to my attention that even though you have a locked unit, when we have a dementia unit, they still should be able to have a selective menu, because they can say yes or no. Do you want carrots or peas? Carrots, yes. Peas, no. They should not be left out of the choice just because their communication methods are limited. Same thing with purees. If you have a selected menu, that pureed person should be able to decide what menu they want, the menu posted or the alternate. And then you should pre up which of the two, which item they have chosen. So keep those in mind. Choices include your locked units, your dementia residents, and your purees as best as you can. So I labeled this Curious Minds. Here's some resources. Nursing Home Inspect is a interesting website. You can go in and actually click on your state, and then it will tell you where you're inconsistent, where the penalties are, what's your average fines, and those kind of things. It's just a good resource. They promote it to families. When you're looking to place your family, you might want to go to these websites, and this is one of them that's recommended. Here is your Medicare.gov, your Nursing Home Compare. This is kind of like where your 5-star rating is. Nursing Home Compare, there's also Hospital Compare, and there's also Home Health Compare. So, non-residents or providers, we're providers of healthcare, but as consumers, we can go into this site and we can say, I want to compare nursing homes in Maryland to see where to put my loved one. I can go in, I can put in a zip code, and it'll pull up all of the facilities in that zip code area, and it'll tell me their star ratings. And I can go in and I can see their survey results, the last posted. And I can see, did they have dietary issues? Did they have nursing issues? Those kind of things are still broken down. And then there's the National Coalition, Citizens Coalition for Nursing Home Reform. This is also a good voice. It talks about your state stars or the state ratings for your facility. And it's a consumer-based coalition, so, it's for the public and to gain more knowledge. So, before we end here, just talking about some things that, how do we take in all these changes? There's a lot of them, but you're on the same page with everybody else. It's not like they only threw out nutrition this time around. Nursing has changes. Administration has changes. There are tons of different changes that are happening at the same time. So we're all kind of put on the same playing field. And now it's up to us how we're going to play each member of our team. How are we going to get to the areas that we need to focus on, and how are we going to get across the finish line and have a solid team that knows the regulations and that does survey every day. I know it sounds old and cliche, but it should be survey every day. I hate hearing people say, oh, we're doing it that way because that's how the surveyors like it. No, we're doing it that way because that's the residents' choice. That's how the residents like it. We just don't do it special when we get into our survey window. That's how we do it every day. And I think for our dining component, when we decide on a menu or a delivery method, we do it for everyone. We're trying out this new, maybe we're going to go to a buffet style, and we're going to see how this works. And when we work through these things, we write our policies and procedures. We train our people so that they know what their positions involve. And us as a leader, we need to be visible. We shouldn't be hiding in our office. We should be out there. When you go to a restaurant, you like it when the manager comes over and asks you, how did you like your meal? Was it enjoyable? Is there anything we can do better? Those are questions we need to ask as well. And mock survey, CMS has given us all the tools. They've given us the dining pathways, the kitchen pathways. They've given us these F tags. They've given us section PP. All this can build your toolkit to do your audit. And I tell people, a good, clean set of eyes. So you might audit, your staff still might be doing things wrong, even though you've audited it and trained them. Maybe you pull in activities to do your audit, or you ask one of your vocal cooks that's maybe needs a little bit more guidance and might think they know a lot more than anyone else. Let them do the mock survey. Let them try and critique and see where it goes. But use the mock surveys and use the tools that have been provided for us. And do it on a regular basis. And the same thing, we've had a lot of discussion on staff competencies. And do we have a job description that includes what a dietary aide can do and what they need to know? Do our cooks, we've had examples of purees. Do we have a puree competency form that we audit our cooks on, that they sign off, that they've done? When we do an annual, if we're getting ready for annual appraisals, do we have a competency sheet that they got on hire that we can now pull back out and review and say, show me your competency on hand washing, or show me your pureeing. I want to watch you puree to see where we're at on that competency. But those competencies help build our audits. And talk to your staff. They need to be comfortable. It's friend, not foe. When the surveyors come, they're not your enemy. They're people like us that took this job because they want to make it better. And we need to work on better. Better is good. It's like better, better, best. We need to do better. So get your staff in that mind frame that when the surveyors come, get as comfortable as you can. Make sure your staff are prepared. Make sure that you drill them on what's our emergency preparedness plan. Where's our emergency menu? Where's our emergency food stored at? What do you do when a resident has a complaint? Do we have a complaint box? Do we have a suggestion box? Resident rights. Do they have the right to refuse? Oh, yes, they do. Well, when they refuse, what do you do? How do you follow up? Like that resident that didn't want to come to breakfast because he'd like to sleep in. Well, if we'd followed up, maybe we would have saw that he needed his supplement. He didn't get it because he didn't come to breakfast. So, you have a right to refuse as a resident. Infection control and prevention, we talk about hand washing. There's also infection control about an accident in the dining room or someone throws up or has an emesis. How do we handle this as dietary so that, we're preventing any infection spreading? And being part of the QAPI. You should have a QAPI plan for your food nutrition services department. You should be involved in the QAPI committees and constantly working to find a process that needs tweaked, that needs bettering, so that we're always working towards being that best we can be. And when we talk about resident rights, that's something that if you're not comfortable as a dietary manager, have your HR review. When we do new hires, we usually have them go through abuse and neglect, and we have these certain key components of a new hire checklist. Get some of your dietary stuff into the new hire checklist and utilize, maybe it's your infection control nurse that you're going to have designated in your buildings in the next phase of these regulations. Have them come and do an in-service. But make sure your staff are prepared so if the surveyor does bring up any of these 5 topics, that they have an idea. They might not be involved in QAPI, but they can say, well, as a department, yes, we're working on QAPI projects. If you need to know more, talk to my manager or talk to my food service director or talk to my CDM. But as long as they kind of are feeling comfortable that they have these questions already given to them, so it's kind of like not coming as a surprise, I think it will be a lot better and flow more for your survey. So now what? We've talked a lot about knowing is not enough. You have to apply what you know. You got to prepare for today to get better tomorrow. And, to be prepared is half the victory. And you really need to hone in on that. Treat every day like it is a survey, because we just need to be better and we need to be ready. Here's a list of resources. These resources can also be found under the tabs, Phase 1 and Phase 2, and then what's to come in Phase 3 on the ANFP website. And then here's my big search. As a CDM, it's been a long road to get the certification listed in the federal reg. We're there now, and by golly, we're in demand. We have surged ahead. We've always done well, but now our certification is out there. A lot of nursing homes are looking. They're looking to hire the CDM so they can be compliant in the reg. So don't sell yourself short. What you do each and every day is so important to having that quality of life for our residents that I just want to give everyone kudos, because it's not a job for the faint of heart. And all these regulations and what we do, at the end of the day, it's the smiles we see in our dining rooms and the compliments we get off of our food and the joy our residents have in just being able to partake in a meal every day. That is true satisfaction. And when the surveyors can see that, when they're in your building, they know that we're successful in our jobs. So thank you, everyone, for what you do. If you have questions, we have also launched at ANFP a website called regs@anfponline.org, so we can take your regulatory questions there. So right now, I'm going to go ahead and turn this over for some questions, and we'll see if we can get those answered.
Thank you. Some reminders before our Q&A. You will be emailed an online evaluation form immediately after today's event. For those requiring CE credit, please download the Certificate of Completion found in your shared files which is at the top right hand of your screen and looks like a gray play button. You will also need to self-report the hours for this session using the prior approval number provided on the certificate. At this time, we'll begin the question and answer session. As a reminder, you may submit a question to our speaker by locating the Q&A box in the lower left-hand corner or right-hand corner of your screen. Click in the blank text field at the bottom of your screen to type in your question, then hit Ask or Enter on your keyboard. The questions will be answered in the order they are received. And please hold for a moment as we wait for these questions to come in. Okay, and our first question is from Nancy. Where can we print new Fed Reg groups for LTCF?
Okay, let's jump back slides. Bear with me. Like I said, we've introduced the new website at ANFP. So you have the resources towards the end of the slide presentation, but we also have at the beginning here the new launched website, and you can find the regulations posted there. So here's the website. You should be able to go under Phase 1 if you want the regulations that came into play last year. Phase 2 is where we're currently at, and you should be able to get a link to print out. Like I said, I'd highly suggest printing out just the food and nutrition services, that 483.60, but that is where you go. If you still hit any issues, then go ahead and use the regs at anfponline.org, and you can shoot me an email and we'll get something to you from there. But utilize the website. We're trying as much to put all the information in one spot so it's one-stop shopping. Okay, next question.
Okay, our next question is from Lulu. How does this affect liberalized diets?
Well, when we talk about liberalized diets, that has been an option that we've had for many years. And when we talk about liberalized diets, that's where you're going in and you're saying, in our facility, these are the diets that we offer. So if you had, before you had maybe a limited concentrated sweets, a 2-gram sodium, you might have had all these restrictive diets. Well, then you went back and you talked to your facility's doctor or physician, you've worked with the families and your dietitian, and you decided, I want to have liberalized diets so everyone can have a general regular diet. And then if they need renal restrictions, say they've got some kidney issues, you can add a renal restriction. You can add, if they're diabetic, you can add some diabetic restrictions, but you can work with your dietitian. And having these choices, that's still paramount. You're still giving them choices, and you're going to personalize it based off of your general regular diet. So you can have liberalized diets. You're still going to personalize them, and you're still going to assess them with the help of your dietitian, nursing, and the physician. So those are still going to be okay. Next question.
Our next question is from Glenna. Do residential care facilities require CDMs also?
When we talk about the RCF, that is a different category that is outside of this ruling. When the federal regulation went into effect, it's for long-term care, intermediate care facilities, ICFs, and skilled nursing facilities. RCF and assisted livings are outside of this regulation. That's where you would need to go back and look at your state-specific regulation for residential care facilities. But once again, you are outside of this new 483.60. Okay, next question.
Our next question is from Roberta. Do you have a link for the most recent kitchen observation form? There are several versions online.
Okay, if you go to the ANFP website under Phase 2, we have the critical element pathway for the kitchen observation and the dining observation listed there. So you can get that, just those documents you need that the surveyors are going to be using. Okay, next question.
Our next question is from Sam. How much water should be in emergency supply per person? And since we get to 2 deliveries per week, can the food supply in stock serve as emergency food?
When we talk about emergency preparedness, you need to take a look at the guidance that if any of your leading age or your healthcare association has put out some guidance. Sometimes they look at your state-specific regs in your state that can tie into the federal emergency preparedness. But you need to take a look at it. For example, I was in a building, in class yesterday, a small building was having to take a third of their storeroom for water that was being delivered from Hy-Vee 2 blocks away. It was going to take up a third of their storage space than an already tight storage room. So when I was talking to that gal, I was like, as long as you can look at a contract and have someone commit to being able to deliver the water within a certain time frame, so say within 4 hours, you can deliver the water I need on demand, then you do not need to store the water in your building. Now, as far as the food is concerned, you should always have a 3-day, the 3-day supply has always been part of our dietary components, either state or federal. So review your emergency preparedness and make sure if you want to go 5 or 7. I've had buildings that had their emergency menu and they've upped it to 5 days. Some have gone 7 days, but you're going to have the food on hand. The water can be a little bit different. If you can have a vendor commit to get it to you within a certain number of hours, so when the disaster strikes, that water's there within 4 hours, for example. You need to review that with your administrator and kind of take a look at, how you want to do that. Next question.
Thank you. And as a reminder, before we go to our next question, if you'd like to download the handouts for today, you can find those in the upper right-hand corner of your screen under your shared files. It looks like a gray play button. And our next question is from Linda. I have a DM that did her schooling about 8 years ago, but never took the CDM test. She has worked in LTC all this time. Does she need to retake her DM course?
In this situation, ANFP is your go-to. They're going to be your vetting agency, so she would need to get a hold of ANFP and send in her transcripts and have a review done at ANFP headquarters to see exactly which pathway. We have 5 various pathways for them to complete the education and to set for the CDM exam. So I would have her get things gathered, contact ANFP, and get the process rolling for them to do a review, and then they can guide her from there based off of that information of what extra needs to be done, if any, for her to become certified and set for the exam. Next question.
Our next question is from Teresa. Can you walk us through how to get to the phase shown on this screen?
Okay, so on the screen, you're going to log into www.anfponline.org. Then when you come to that screen, you're going to go in, and I'm going to log in myself so we can get that. Then you're going to go under the Become a CDM, that first tab. Scroll down to New Regulations for CDM CFPP. And voila, there are the different phases. And then once again, phase 1 was last year, 2016. Phase 2 is 2017. Phase 3 will go into effect 2019. And by clicking on each of the phases, there's going to be a little bit of a synopsis, talks about the phase, and then we have resources, and then expectations and compliance. We have a web page, and then there's a listing of documents, and then we will as well put any webinars that are pertinent to the topics on there, so everything is linked. And you should be able to do the downloads and take a look-see. Like I say, we're going to keep that as current as possible. Like with CMS, I can go to bed tonight. Tomorrow morning, I can have something new pop up. Like I said, they had, they just gave us the latest and greatest. Wednesday before Thanksgiving and Friday, the items showed up. So it's constantly evolving, and we'll stay on top of any questions that we're seeing that we feel we could address and give some clarity on. We'll post them here. So come back to this routinely. Take a check every now and then, see if there's new stuff posted. If you need more information, we do have the regs at ANFP Online email that's dedicated to your regulation questions. So use the ANFP site. It's there to help you. And like I said, it's a work in action. It's a fluid page. We're going to be following CMS and seeing what the guidance is as we go forward. Okay. Any other questions?
Our next question is from Erlene. Are there specific updates for assisted living?
Once again, assisted living, you're in your own boat with two oars. You're sailing down the river by yourself right now. Assisted living regulations, my best recommendation for you is to take a look at what your state-specific assisted living regulations say. I can give you a good example. The state of Iowa, where I live, we have CDMs written in the assisted living regulations as the food service supervisor designee. So some of your states will have specific verbiage on who needs to be the person in charge. The federal regs are a little looser. So I would take and look at your assisted living regs for your state. If your building is a continuum of care where maybe you have RCF, residential care, you have skilled care, you have long-term care beds, and then you have assisted livings attached, it always goes, the regs you follow are always the more stringent regulations. So in the case for the certified dietary manager, unless your state has regulations for long-term care that says CDM, the federal reg right now is the most stringent, that it requires a certified dietary manager. So in your RCF and your assisted living, if your state regulations don't state that and you're connected as a community with a SNF and an LTC, then the federal regs say that there's going to have to be a certified dietary manager in charge of the Food and Nutrition Services Department that feeds all these other levels of care. So that's a suggestion. Check your state-specific assisted living regs to see what's required. Next question.
It appears we have no further questions at this time.
Okay, great. Can you remind them one more time how to get their certificate?
Yes, to download the files, go up to the right-hand corner of your screen, top right-hand corner, and there's a button that looks like a gray play button. That is your media library or shared files, and you can find those downloads there. And Barbara, if you have any closing comments.
And I think this wraps it up. Thanks, everyone. Watch for, we will have this available for recording later on. So hopefully this has covered bases and continue everyone to have a wonderful holiday season and keep up the good work taking care of our seniors. So appreciate everything you do.
Thank you all for your attention. This concludes today's conference call. All participants may now disconnect.